Hey Nick, I hope you're enjoying editing right now. My name's Indy, and guess what? Okay, so before we start anything else, I have a story I want to share with you guys. It all started in the 2nd grade. It was a Friday night. This guy always hung out with my friends and I, and this one night, he was coming over to my house with my family. So it was just, you know, one of those like dinners where it's like, oh, this is kind of awkward because like, it's like your family's with this family and then you're kind of like stuck with these kids and you're like, oh, I know you, but like we don't hang out by ourselves. Does that make sense? This guy and I were sitting at the dinner table, okay? Of course, my parents and them, they're like on their adult table and we're sitting with our little like styrofoam cups and food and, okay. We were just talking and it was fun and then all of a sudden he's like, Indy, I love you. What? And he's like, I love you. I'm like, what are you talking about? Like what? And it was just all, it was like really weird and awkward and I was like, ew, no. And so I ran over to my mom and he was like, don't tell your mom. And I was like, I'm gonna tell my mom anyway. And so then I ended up telling her and yeah. All of that to say, as important as honesty is, sometimes you just don't want to hear it.
Now, isn't that true in a lot of areas of life? Honesty about some things is great, but honesty about other things isn't. And somehow we know not to give our opinion when our friend gets a bad haircut. And we also know not to give our opinion on our mom's delicious dinner. We know not to be super honest with everything, and especially when our teachers ask how much we've been studying. But the same unspoken rule seems to exist in church. It feels like there's just some things that we just don't talk about. And let's be real, like we do not have to be that honest. And for a lot of us, the area that we don't mention is doubt.
Think about it for a second. Do you ever have doubts when it comes to church or God? Have you ever wondered things like, is God real? Maybe thinking of God as the spirit in the sky doesn't seem realistic. Maybe it feels more like a fairy tale. Maybe you're wondering if God is good. Maybe you don't question that God is real, but maybe you question if he's noticing you. Maybe you ask yourself, does he like me? Does he care about me?
Have you ever wondered stuff like that before? Yes, you have. We all have. But the problem is, it feels hard to talk about these things at church. I mean, what if God hears us? Would he be mad? Also, what if other people at JHM hear us? Do they get mad at us? Do they judge us? Would we get kicked out? But maybe you found that ignoring your doubts isn't any better. It doesn't make them go away. Sometimes ignoring them makes them even louder and more annoying.
So all that said, here's what you need to know. Whether you've been following Jesus your whole life or you're just here to get out of your house, we want you to know JHM is a place where you can feel welcome and safe. And that includes any doubts or questions you have. And beyond that, I want to let you know, doubts are not necessarily bad either. I mean, Jesus' closest friends even doubted him sometimes. The truth is, doubt is normal. It's not shameful or embarrassing. And if I'm being totally real, you'd be surprised how many of us have doubts sometimes.
One of Jesus' friends became famous for doubting. His name was Thomas. He was later named Doubting Thomas. What a great nickname. He was one of Jesus' closest friends, one of his disciples. He saw Jesus heal people. He saw Jesus cast out demons. He saw miracle after miracle firsthand. But when Jesus came back to life, Thomas had serious doubts.
Wouldn't you? I mean, rising from the dead isn't something that you see every day. Now we all see that in TV. You know, actors come back alive after a 3-minute commercial. But we don't see people come back alive after 3 days of being in a tomb. That just doesn't happen. In the book of John, Thomas and the other disciples were all hanging out with each other. And in their mind, Jesus was dead. Now other followers not in the room were claiming that Jesus was alive. It was like really confusing, which one's true. Is he alive or is he dead? And on top of all of that, the religious leaders were probably hunting down Jesus' followers. And I can only imagine it's not easy to make any sense of this, especially when you're getting hunted down and being trapped in a room.
And that's when Thomas spoke up. So the other disciples told Thomas, "We have seen the Lord." But he said to them, "Unless I see the nail marks in his hands and put my finger where the nails were and put my hand into his side, I will not believe." Thomas would have been so excited to see Jesus alive because Thomas spent every day with Jesus for years. Jesus was his friend. So it's like that one person in the group that leaves and changes everything. That's how it was when Jesus was gone. So if it turns out Jesus is alive, this is the best news Thomas has ever heard.
But there's just one problem. How does someone rise from the dead after 3 days? It's impossible. We can judge Thomas all we want, but let's be honest. If we had a friend who died and days later they're walking around again talking to people, we'd have our doubts too. So Thomas is honest and he's truthful. He says, unless I can see the marks on Jesus' hands, I'm not gonna believe it. You can imagine his surprise when he sees Jesus 3 days later. Thomas and his friends are just hanging out, and then Jesus shows up.
Check this out. In John's writing, he says, even though the doors were locked, Jesus walked right into the room, which I have to say is one of the coolest things ever. It's crazy. He walks through a locked door. He stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." I don't think the first thing I would feel is peace. After all, a guy who is dead is now alive. I would have leapt out of my chair screaming. As awesome as his entrance was, what happened next is cooler.
Then Jesus said to Thomas, "Put your finger here, see my hands. Reach out your hand and put it to my side. Stop doubting and believe." Jesus met Thomas right where he was. He knew the doubts Thomas had, but he wasn't mad at Thomas. Jesus went straight to Thomas's doubt and offered him encouragement. He didn't yell at him or ignore him. He just asked Thomas to believe in what he was showing him.
The way that Thomas responded was incredible. Thomas said to him, "My Lord and my God." The second he knew it was Jesus, Thomas stopped doubting and started believing. He wasn't upset with himself because he used to doubt. Now he's saying, "I'm in."
So, what does that mean for us when we struggle with doubt? First of all, you need to know that it's okay. Doubt is a part of life. It's something we all do. When you're wrestling with doubt, just remember this. Don't let doubt keep you out. Don't just sit there with your doubts. Jesus didn't tell Thomas to just keep on doubting, everything will be fine. No, he told Thomas to move towards him and to build on his faith. And now, you can do the same. Here's some ways to keep you moving forward in times of doubt.
Here's the first thing. Make a list of things that God has done in your life. If you can't think of anything he's done for you in your life, think about things he's done for others. When doubt shows up, this list will help you remember the things that God has done for you in your life. Now this is super important. If you're starting to feel unsure about certain things now, you can be sure of what he's already done. Pray. Thomas was so honest with the things that he needed, and we can be too. Ask God to show himself in your life. Even if you don't think he's real, ask. But then give it some time. Just be patient. Like, I know we want things right now, but that's just not how God always works. When you're talking to God more, your doubts start to fade.
Just hang in there. Don't give up. Keep coming to JHM, keep reading, and keep searching. Please keep being honest about your doubts with God. Don't assume you're going to be stuck with these doubts forever. Here's the thing. If you keep going, I believe Jesus will do amazing things in your life. And lastly, be patient. Some of you guys may not deal with these doubts that often. If that's the case, be patient with the people who are doubting. Did you notice that when Thomas was doubting, the other disciples didn't kick him out? He was still part of their group. They continued to give him a place to have his doubts. And JHM needs to be the same kind of place.
All in all, there's something about Thomas that I want you to remember. Don't let doubt keep you out. It's important to know God does life-changing things when we trust him. A perfect example of this is a guy named Matthew. Matthew was a guy that he seemed like he had everything figured out. But in reality, Matthew is living in two different worlds. He was a Jewish guy, but he worked for the Romans as a tax collector. In that culture, everyone hated tax collectors. The Jewish people hated him. He took their money for taxes. They were seen as traitors and thieves. They used their job for their own greedy reasons.
And here's why this matters. As Jesus went on from there, he saw a man named Matthew sitting on a tax collector's booth. "Follow me," he told him. And Matthew got up and followed him. No questions asked. Matthew went. We don't know a lot about Matthew's story, but we know Matthew didn't get his questions answered before he moved. He had no clue if it was gonna be worth it. Jesus didn't spend the next 3 days explaining what was gonna happen. Jesus simply said, "Follow me." And Matthew had to decide whether or not he was gonna say, "I'm in." Other than that, there was no guarantee about what was gonna happen next. In that moment, Matthew decided to trust Jesus. He trusted that Jesus had far greater things in store than what was in his tax booth. And honestly, it was totally worth it. But here's what's crazy. That tax booth had everything that made him money. Following Jesus was essentially quitting his job and having no plans for what was happening next.
Don't let your fears or doubts stop you. They aren't deal breakers. Even through all your doubts, you can still get up and walk out of your booth, whatever your booth is. Trust me, I know how hard that step is. There will always be something in the booth calling you back, something that seems better or seems safer, but you will never know what God can do until you take the step like Matthew did.
Doubting is normal. It's a place we all get caught up in sometimes, but it's not a place to stay. Don't let doubt keep you out. Following Jesus starts with a step. As you head out today, I want you to keep thinking about this. What would the next step in your relationship with Jesus look like? What would it look like for you to say, "I'm in" for the first time? What would you have to do differently? Would you be willing to say just once, I'm in. Even if you didn't even know what was gonna happen next. Now I know this is scary and all, but really it is difficult. But I seriously believe you can do this. And I believe you're gonna be glad that you did.